And every day, I practice martial arts. You see?
Watch out!
Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, Bruchim Abiyim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi. You have found Beit Virtuali, and let's stir up a little Torah together. As Jews represent a meager 0.2% of the world population, it's not surprising that the ins and outs of the underpinning rituals are not necessarily known by more than a handful of people. The details that people outside of Judaism are willing to question, however, are telling, if not occasionally amusing. For example, the single most common question, in all seriousness, that I've had from non-Jews in my years in Germany has been, Wie halten Sie die Mütze auf Ihren Kopf? How do you keep that hat thingy on your head? I guess as most people have visible clips, and I use top secret technology in the form of internal clips stuck to the inside of my kippah, the curiosity when I am at a public event simply must be satisfied. In the States, the most common question has been in the form of an attempted gotcha, as groups were welcome to visit the synagogue building of all the places that I've served and get a rabbinical guided tour of all the objects within. The Ner Tamid, or the eternal light above the Torah ark, was simply too much. Too much temptation, After ascertaining that the one we used was battery-powered, some very clever visitor would ask the obvious follow-up, often liberally dusted with snark, "What do you do when the light goes out?" The answer? I changed the battery. Some could simply not resist the final opined dig, "So I guess the eternal light's not so eternal, huh?" I think the difference between the German and US American most common questions should be predictable culturally and psychologically. The theme of Judaism in Germany is societally fraught with the baggage of National Socialism. But even in the fourth generation after the Shoah, which questions are safe or not safe to ask that strange dude with the funny cap standing in front of you is not going to be so obvious. So, a question about the funny cap, the yarmulke, the kippah, it is. And yes, even this humble question, referring to last week, can open gateways if you are aware of the importance of your ambassadorial role. In the States, getting serious for a second, with massively arising anti-Semitic attitudes on both left and right that remain difficult to discuss without defensiveness or blank stares, the "let's catch the rabbi and showing him how silly his religion is" tactic is likewise at least somewhat predictable. Short version, in Germany, Jews are different, and I'm not at ease because of history, so I will ask something safe. In the USA, I believe I understand Judaism, but have a vague sense of unease that I cannot identify, so I will challenge. Of course, as a rabbi, I need to also recognize that the questions I get will be different from non-rabbi Jews, so I'm not trying to universalize my personal experience or interpretation of this experience. It's just some food for thought. But taking it a step further, the discomfort around questions regarding Judaism should challenge us Jews to look in the mirror. As Judaism is a tribal religion, entered only via birth or a complicated and long conversion process, there's an automatic inside versus outside perception problem that seldom goes over well if you're on the outside. What in the world are they hiding in there? Do some research on why we actually open up the door during a Passover Seder. Add to that the religious proscription to proselytize, which I will argue is a darn good thing, and you get the unintended result of poor marketing skills. If your religion requires you to convince others to adopt the religion, you are going to develop methodologies and skills to do this as effectively as possible. If that is not an obligation, which again I will argue is a darn good thing, there's not a built-in dynamic of know my religion so well that I can have a nuanced discussion about it with anyone that asks in any situation. Because we can't effectively market ourselves to others, we don't really even begin learning how to, more importantly perhaps, market to ourselves. Put differently, have we ever thought about how to keep the eternal light lit when the batteries die? In order to discuss Judaism, we have to engage in it. Engaging does not mean passive presence. To repeat from last week and to jump in on our little teaser at the beginning, you cannot win a street fight by having watched a few Bruce Lee films. You actually need to practice. To take this further, discussing the ins and outs of Jeet Kune Do with a practitioner of another form of martial arts using only the knowledge gained from movies will not make us look good in that conversation. This is also an expansion on some of the themes from last week. It is worth taking even the smallest moment when we make a claim to ourselves or others regarding our expertise on if that expertise is something we have practiced or something we heard once from someone that sounded like they knew what they were talking about. This
I know Kung Fu.
Is what we want. This repeated 10,000 times is what we actually need. Jumping into Judaism, take the Ner Tamid, or eternal light itself. The ritual sacred obligation for this object gets a few verses in Leviticus in addition to 2 whole verses right at the beginning of Parshat Teztaveh. This is usually where I would quote an English translation, but that translation is the problem itself, and recognizing that there is a problem is part of what it means to engage actively in Judaism, to practice, rather than simply watching the movie version. The Hebrew reads, Ve'ata tetzaveh et bnei Israel v'yikchu elecha shemen zait zach, katit la'maor laha'alot ner tamid. The old 1917 JPS Jewish translation from the Hebrew reads much like the majority of Christian translations. And thou shalt command the children of Israel that they bring unto thee pure olive oil beaten for the light to cause the lamp to burn continuously. Keeping in the Shakespearean mode for a bit, this is only slightly less magical than the King James Version, which probably owns the center stage for Anglo understanding of this verse. Similarly, and thou shalt command the children of Israel that they bring thee pure olive oil, beaten for the light, to cause the lamp to burn always. The eternal light. Magic. It's not that the translations are bad. The issue is around the word tamid, which indeed means eternal or continuously. I mean, this is the temple we're talking about. It existed way back then. Things way back then can exist in a different reality because they are not now. The talking snake must have either been a literal talking snake because old holy book, or we get to discount everything because it's all fantasy. The parting of the Sea of Reeds was either a dramatic miracle that unfolded exactly as Cecil B. DeMille or the team at DreamWorks prophesied, or it's all just silly stories. Having any other answer requires work. It requires practice. So back to the Ner Tamid. The issue at hand is if Tamid is an attribute of the Ner, or the light, or if it's part of a ritual process. Indeed, Tamid is a technical term from the temple cult. Chapter 28 of the Book of Numbers delineates the Korban Tamid, or the perpetual daily offerings. This refers to the offerings that are brought every day or every occurrence of a specific day. This does not mean that the bringing of the offering continues without stopping. It's not an eternal offering. It is a daily offering. With this ritual and perhaps more down-to-earth understanding of Tamid, we get the most recent JPS translation. Without these and thous, you shall further instruct the Israelites to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps regularly. It seems so small, but it's the central crux of that sacred tradition must be miraculous, or that sacred tradition must be silly antipodes versus that sacred tradition can point us to internal truths that point to external realities and have daily resonance. If the Torah is looked at literally, only literally, it can only become an object of faith without rationality, or an object of rejection because it reflects a backwards humanity that should not have any say in the present. That's exactly what's behind the snark of, well, the eternal light's not so eternal then, is it? I'm smarter than your Bible. But what about a tradition whose complex language spins out ever more complex interpretive possibilities? Not as a matter of sophistry, me trying to make it sound good in the current year, but as a matter of central value going back to the beginning of the religion. Each interpretation spins out a potential personal, family, tribal, or global question whose repetition has the potential to elevate us, to bring us together. Is there any value, for example, of having daily processes, daily rituals, daily practice? What does research have to say about this? Now add on top of that the concept of light, the metaphor of light, the thought. Light. What does it mean to accept the obligation of creating light every day without fail, continuously, always? When I stomp my feet and growl at my coworker because my day started poorly with a stubbed toe or an unresolved argument, have I brought daily light into my presence or unconsciously worked to snuff out someone else's? What do the effects of a day where my conscious carrying of light into the sacred moments and places of my life bring forth versus the ones where I carry with me at best disregard for what happens in my wake, or at worst where my to hell with everyone, I'm going to get mine cloud of darkness is worn as a badge? If I wake up knowing that I have a light to kindle and I have a way to do it, my first minutes are directed towards this activity, will my day have a different character than one where my first minutes are filled with flipping through a feed whose programming is predetermined that it will anger me the most to keep me engaged in that anger for the longest possible time? I'm not being silly. This is truly the choice we have at hand. The interpretive mindset turns what might seem to be antiquated and arbitrary temple ritual described in an antiquated old language book, especially if we use these and thous, into an acknowledgement of a deep reality. We as humans are going to get into habits and repeat behaviors every day of our lives. No matter what they are, we will get into and live through habits. If these behaviors are completely ruled by unconscious influences or our basest emotions that are manipulated by external algorithms, chances are our habits will not elevate us or others. Why are we still wondering why we have an epidemic of stress and anxiety? Why is this somehow a mystery? If our behaviors contain elements of directed ritual, where, yes, we add, oh my goodness, God forbid, rules to our life, that we live by, not because some external hand is doing it, but because that is part of our dialogue with ourselves and that which is greater than us, then we might start the day with the first words in the Siddur, Modeh ani lefenecha, I give thanks. Compare that beginning of each day to, oh, can you believe what I did or said yesterday? I am so furious. We don't have a temple anymore, but the sages of the Talmud had the wisdom to suggest that prayer, for example, was not only an adequate but superior replacement to temple ritual. For many of us, that means the prayer as it's written in our prayer book, but how many have left the daily dialogue with Judaism because they did not see where it is also suggested in the Talmud that we follow the needs of our heart, that we step away from the words of the prayer book? It's actually okay. The important thing is the setting aside the time for the daily, continuous tamid. The words of the prayer say Modeh ani, then Asher Yatzar, then Elohai Neshama. The archetypal meaning is start with thankfulness, and then look at where we stand physically in this reality at this moment, and then start moving to how we are connected to something greater than we are, even if we might define that slightly differently in all of our various traditions. The words have definite meaning and a definite tradition. They also have a symbolic way of pointing us to universal truths. In the end, that magical definition of a light that burns forever is not such a bad idea or image, as long as we understand that it's aspirational. It's the end of the path. Until then, the path is all of us taking responsibility for filling our days with a deliberate decision to be aware of whether we are carrying light or darkness with us as part of our daily habits. That's not magical. It's also not easy because we have to practice. It's a daily struggle where we will absolutely wake up on some days and the batteries are dead, just as there were some days that I walked into the synagogue and had no energy to go into the back and get the ladder and get the screwdriver and climb up to stick fresh AA's into our memory of a lamp that once lit the temple where we imagined a literal presence of God to exist, meaning the ultimate light, that which binds us all together and gives us common source. On those days with neither energy nor desire, the work was completed only because Judaism forces us via its daily ritual into the melding of personal and communal. It's about me, but only as long as it can simultaneously be about us. I have sacred obligations as much as we have sacred obligations. Judaism seems to acknowledge how hard it can be and how empty we can feel. And then we change the batteries. Shabbat Shalom. We'll see you next time.
וקול שופר הריעו לפני המלך אדוני